Hello and welcome to Take Time. I'm your host Patrick Marlett, and today I have a very special review. If you're watching this video on the day of its release, you'll know that it's June 6, 2019. However, some of you might not know that today marks the 75th anniversary of D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces led what is the world's largest land, air, and sea operation in military history, crossing the English Channel to invade the Normandy beaches of France. That landing included over 150,000 soldiers, 5,000 ships, and 11,000 aircrafts. That day is known as D-Day. Today, we'll be speaking on one of those 11,000 aircraft. In my hands, I hold the Tockr D-Day, made in collaboration with Commemorative Air Force. This piece was made not only to pay homage to its namesake, but to preserve a piece of history. You see, each one of these dials is made from a piece of salvage material from a C-47 transport ship. But not just any C-47. That's All Brother was the lead aircraft during the D-Day invasion. As you can see, this is an interesting challenge for me. I don't just want to give you my opinions on this watch because there's more to this watch than meets the eye. As a matter of fact, it has a lot of history and it's going to attract a variety of different collectors and for various reasons. So I want to start this video off not only with that preamble, but a little bit of background on what went into making the Tockr D-Day. What's particularly interesting about this timepiece is that CAF contacted Tockr on the project and not the other way around, as they love Tockr's aviation style. Now, as far as what makes this point interesting, that'll all clear up with the end of this story. Conversation took place between January and February 2018. That's All Brother was found in a horrible state, dilapidated in a hangar for years before the acquisition of CAF happened. A couple years prior to this conversation, Commemorative Air Force began a Kickstarter campaign to restore the C-47, to make it as historically accurate as possible so that they could bring it out to air shows for educational and demonstrative purposes. It underwent a 3-year-long restoration to be air-ready by the 75th anniversary of D-Day. During this restoration, much of the aluminum that built up the interior components of the plane were salvaged. That's where Tockr comes in their 2018 conversation on how they could best utilize this material. Now, the dial wasn't the original manner in which the repurposed material was going to be used. As a matter of fact, the case, the oscillating wheel, the case back were all considered first until the dial was ultimately settled on. As the material quantity was so high, the possibility of a whole dial being made of aluminum was possible. And on a quick side note, I've been asked numerous times as to whether the aluminum that makes up the dial has undergone any sort of process to maintain its integrity, and of course the answer was yes. I just didn't realize what Austin had to go through to make that possible. You see, each aluminum dial went through a sophisticated process of various baths of cathodic passivization in order to neutralize the usual effects of corrosion that can happen in association with metals of this type. The coating that was ultimately applied to the aluminum dials is called Passivex AL, so there should be no concerns to the longevity of the watch. As mentioned, the conversation between Austin of Tockr Watches and CAF began early of 2018. Tockr intends to produce 500 stainless steel models of the D-Day, as well as 75 limited edition models of the Lieutenant Pepper edition. Now, I should state here that Pepper flew a C-47 during World War II, but not specifically That's All Brother. Also note that a portion of the Lieutenant Pepper model sales will go to help a veteran society still being decided on between Austin and, of course, Mr. Pepper's family. Also note that a portion of every proceed will go towards the CAF to help with the preservation of future projects. And if you care about the preservation of kinetic history, I'll encourage you to visit CAF's website where you can make a direct donation to their cause. Now, why this collaboration is so interesting and this particular project so awe-inspiring is that Tockr is turning 2 years old this year come November. And already they're doing a lot of amazing work. In my hands, I hold the hard-worn D-Day, and of course you can get them with a clean-cut dial as well as a stamped dial. And interesting enough, the stamped dial versions happen to be the most popular. I think most collectors of the D-Day up to this point happen to be aviation enthusiasts, but we'll get to that during the review. Now, with that little bit of background on the collaboration between Tockr and CAF, of course, the importance of this watch out of the way, let's jump into this review. But before I jump into the review, I want you all to know that Austin sent me 2 of these models. As a matter of fact, this hard-worn version here, as well as the clean cut I'll showcase in just a moment, and he told me to only send back 1. So this was indeed gifted to the channel. I happen to be a huge fan of the hard-worn look Of course, with that knowledge in mind, you can take any of my opinions however you choose. I've been wearing this piece constantly since I received it, trying to wrap my head around all of its qualities and whether I like them or not. However, how has the D-Day been in everyday use? Well, without further ado, let's talk Tockr. The cushion case of the Tockr D-Day measures 42 millimeters in diameter, excluding the crown. It's 43 millimeters from lug end to lug end. It's 13 millimeters thick from the back of that stainless steel case to the tippy top of that anti-glare sapphire crystal, and features 22 millimeter lug widths. The 316L stainless steel case of the Tockr D-Day C47 houses an ETA 2834A6, which boasts about a 40 to 42 hour power reserve. However, the main feature of this watch happens to be the dial. Now, in case you're wondering, the salvage material that makes up the dial of the Tockr D-Day came predominantly from the fuselage and cockpit area of That's All Brother. Now, other important areas of note, that seconds hand flying around the dial, that's actually a silhouette of a C-47 aircraft, not just any old plane. And the total package will come with a handmade box by Kyle Hicks, as well as a leather strap from Hicks himself as well. These are all made in USA. The package also includes a really lovely olive drab canvas strap. And just to showcase what this box looks like, I mean, I couldn't do this video without mentioning this for a second, at least a brief second. This is the nicest presentation box I've ever received with a watch. It's literally the most insane packaging. I understand that the inspiration behind this gift box was that it was made to look similar to a flight jacket, and I know they went through a couple different material options for the outside, but they ultimately settled on wood, and when you open it up, it looks like a shearling jacket, like a flight jacket. Maybe you can see that in camera here. You can see the olive drab strap off to the side there, as well as the actual shearling, and there's a leather pouch up there that features the warranty card. So yeah, the nicest presentation box I've received with any item on this show to date. The olive drab strap I'll showcase on one of the other products, but I did want to just show that off. Also, it's important to note that the D-Day shares a case with the No Name, and I understand that it's Austin's intention to ultimately produce a bracelet for this case design. So if you are a bracelet nut like myself, be aware that that is coming to you. But now, as I do with all my reviews here on the channel, I like to start with the bad and then move on to the good before giving my final verdict on a review item. So let's talk bad notes. The Tockr D-Day has some really lovely style cues overall. The font choice for the numerals, the case design to match that of their Air Defender series. They're starting to create a language for themselves. However, the handset on this watch, in my opinion, the minute hand could just be a tad longer. It kind of bothers me how far it is from the minute track on that rehaut that extends to the outer edges of our crystal here. You can see what I mean. It just comes up shy from reaching those minute markers to being perfectly legible. Now, it isn't such a huge deal. It's certainly not a deal breaker. And I can only assume they went with a shorter handset that's so you can take in more of the dial, But I would have really preferred if at least the minute hand could have been slightly elongated or maybe even wider to distinguish it from the hour hand. But sometimes when those two are together, it can get a little confusing. Again, although I love how the handset was accomplished, the finishing of the hands look lovely on this and the bronze model, I do think they are a tad short for my liking. I think if you have poor eyesight, this might be a little difficult in regards to legibility, but I can see why potentially it was made shorter so that you can take in, again, more of that dial, as that is the main feature of this watch. This next note is a little bit of a neutral note, but I've been wearing that hard-worn model a whole heck of a lot, more than this one here, and it hasn't gotten scuffed up yet, but you'll notice that there are a lot of high polished bits to scuff up on this watch, and if you are a nut about scratches, dings, dents on your timepieces, well, you know, this is a difficult investment because you are spending quite a bit on one of these models, and if you were to scratch it up, I can see how that might upset a few. And on that note, the stainless steel versions of the Tockr D-Day sell at $1,990, while the Alfred Pepper models sell at $2,700. Again, it's important to note that a portion of the proceeds here will go towards a good cause, But if you are interested in this watch and don't have the spending money, that of the case design, as well as that of the handset and overall aesthetic with the dial, Tockr makes a very similar watch that's more affordable. It's called the Tockr No Name. Those list for $950. Of course, there will be links to CAF and Tockr in the description down below, so do check those out. So price is a big deterrent. Yes, $2,000 is a lot, even for something with as much historical significance as this, particularly from a company, again, that's not even 2 years old yet. But it is very impressive what they're doing, and I have to say, I'm impressed with this watch overall. So my only real gripe with this product is that it didn't come stock with a bracelet. However, I have to say that the included accessories are excellent. The canvas green strap is absolutely lovely, and I have not taken this off, this Hicks leather strap. It was made specifically for the D-Day models, and I have to say, he did an amazing job. Kyle, rather, did an amazing job pairing these with the D-Day's look. The Tockr D-Day is easily the biggest head turner in my collection now. I've gone to a few get-togethers with this piece, not only camera meetup, but recent watch meetup, and everyone wanted to know what was the story behind this dial. It's just that kind of watch, especially when you have a dial that is as gnarly as this. It's easily going to catch a lot of attention, as well as your imagination. I'm so happy they decided to use the repurposed material in this way. You know, salvaging it to make an oscillating wheel would have been fine, but certainly not as dramatic as this. And also this way you get to appreciate the That's All Brother material and its history that much more. Oddly enough, my favorite part about this dial is the date window cutout. It's funny because I had a long conversation with Austin before doing this review because I want to get as much information to share with you all before filming this. And he told me that these weren't initially going to come with a date. And I told him that, to me, the date makes this watch what it is. You really, on the surface, can't take in how spectacular that piece of aluminum is until you look at that CNC cutout. You just don't get how thick a piece of metal this is until you see that cutout where the date is. You can just see its thickness, the dimensionality of this material, and perhaps how it was used in that fuselage or cockpit area. The cutout gives this watch a lot more life than many other pieces. You know, you don't see date windows with that sort of depth unless there's a giant frame over top of the dial. You know, no date windows ever looked particularly special to me, but for some reason, this is a key feature to this watch. And a very, very happy coincidence that they decided to go with a date. I'm happy that they did. You know, I generally don't care for dates on watches. However, the one here makes this watch all the better. Now, for those of you wondering, the lume on this watch is more than adequate. I know that he wanted stronger lume on the plane of the seconds hand. It is a little weak, but it does do the job. The lume that's most important, in my opinion, is that of the handset and the numerals on the dial, and those are perfectly adequate for day-to-day use. It's hard not to talk about this watch without blabbing about the dial. It's absolutely stellar, whether you like the stamped model with the serial numbers on it, the clean cut dial with the paint, and that's the original paint from That's All Brother, by the way. The ship itself, or aircraft, was repainted numerous times on its exterior, but the interior maintained the integrity of its service years in World War II. So the paint you see, the hard-worn look of this dial, it's all original. But moving away from the dial, I have to say I really do love this case design. Again, it's very similar to Tockr's Air Defender, and this was made specifically for this watch, the design of this case. It's interesting because CAF only did so much as providing the material for the dial. Tockr had to put in money for not only the case design, but the manufacturing of all of these products. Obviously, machining the dials couldn't have been too tricky, but making a case to fit something with so much variance, that is, the thickness of those aluminum dials, was tricky. And I understand that was a larger part of this undertaking, getting something that would universally fit every single one of those salvaged materials. I can only imagine how much trial and error that involved, but ultimately they settled on what I think is the perfect case for this design. It has a very military air to it. That could just be the brown in tandem with the army green of the dial and that of the matching rehaut, but it's a really good look for this dial. I think this was the perfect marriage of those two, even though it shares a language with their air defender. Again, I think CAF chose them because they have a very lovely aviation style. The stainless steel caseback of the D-Day is specially engraved with "That's All Brother" and the badge of the Commemorative Air Force, as well as their text. Now, there are 500 of these being made, but they aren't numbered out of 500. It's just the number off the line that's listed. So while they are limited by production, they're not necessarily a limited model. But there you go, that's what the caseback looks like, and you can see I've kind of scratched this thing up already. Oh, another thing to take in while we're looking at this piece is that crown. I just love the action of this crown. It doesn't screw in, but the look looks as if it's a propeller in motion. Again, that aviation style in play, but the grip is fantastic. The crown itself is humongous. However, it doesn't eat into the wrist. Of course, I'll show you guys what that looks like in just a second with a wrist shot, but surprisingly, this doesn't eat into the wrist, which is really lucky. Otherwise, that would have been a bad note, but it's very easy to grip, obviously very easy to wind. Again, this isn't screw in, so you can go ahead and hand wind this right off the get-go. And setting time with it is made all the easier with how giant this crown is. So if you're a sucker for no crown guards and big crowns, you're getting that here. Now, on that note, I'm going to provide you all the wrist shots so you can see what this might look like on your wrist. Now, I really enjoyed my time with the Tockr Air Defender. I think it's an awesome piece, and he's doing a lot to promote that watch. But this watch, to me, is really the pinnacle of his collection, Austin's collection. I mean, I think this is going to be the piece to own from Tockr for a long time to come, and the one I think is most special in regards to their brand. But here is the Tockr D-Day on a 7¼ inch wrist for all of your admirers, and when you are going to admire it, it's going to look a little something like this. And here is the Tockr D-Day on my 7¼ inch wrist. This is what it'll look like when you are going to admire it. And I have to say, this case is just absolutely stunning. I love the fat bezel in that large dial, and just how small the lugs are comparatively to everything else. This really is the definition of a cushion case. And what's interesting is that you'll notice that it has a sort of semi-shroud to the lugs. This is very similar to, again, their Tockr Air Defender series, which this pulls a lot of its language off of. But again, I like it when brands have a succinct design language between each of their models, very similar to Rolex in that regards. They're sort of like the kings of doing the same thing multiple times, but doing it well. And of course, this is sort of a variation of their Air Defender and a Tockr design. What I will state is, this bugged me at first, but I got very much accustomed to it. The way the case is cut, it appears to be wanting to be mated with a bracelet. And I can imagine this, seated with a very similar bracelet to the Air Defender, and it would look fantastic on a bracelet. But you can see how there's a big, lip here leading up to the bezel. You can see that's where the end link would ultimately fit. So very excited to see a bracelet release for one of these. Of course, I'm going to get my hands on one when it does. I have to. I'm a bracelet nut. But on leather, oh boy, this thing is just a dream. It looks so lovely. And while we're down here, why don't we just take in that dial a little bit longer? It's interesting to note that, despite which model you get, the clean cut, the stamped version, or the hard worn, as I'm wearing now, there is always going to be a variation with how the dial was ultimately completed. The brushing of paint on the clean cut version, the degradation of time on the hard worn version, of course the serial numbers and printings you'll find on the stamped version. No one Tockr D-Day is alike. And that's ultimately what makes this watch so special. You really do feel like you're wearing something unique when you have this on your wrist. And moreover, something that's just historically significant. So what do I think about the Tockr D-Day ultimately? I think it is a beautiful way to memorialize a piece of history. I'm just so impressed with Tockr's work here, particularly when you realize that this is a group still in its infancy. It's barely past its formative years, and they are doing things leaps and bounds ahead of other companies by way of design and by way of tribute. This is an absolutely lovely piece, and I think CAF couldn't have paired with a better brand. If If you are at all interested in owning a piece of history or are an aviation enthusiast and didn't just want to buy another Flieger or a military-issued timepiece, this is an amazing way to go if you want to own something in your collection that's truly special. And before I close out the video, I couldn't go without mentioning this very special timepiece in my hands. This is, of course, Lieutenant Pepper's very own Tockr D-Day. Now, you might have read a few articles about this piece, but Mr. Pepper was given a presentation model and ultimately he was going to receive a production model, and that's what I have in my hands here. And I don't know how I wound up on the flight plan, but I feel very, very special for having this in hand. Thank you, Austin, and the team over at Tockr for sending this my way. And before I close out the video, I do want to point out just a few differences between this and the standard version. This has brushed sides as opposed to the high polished ends, and of course is numbered 1 through 75, and of course Lieutenant Pepper will get number 1 of 75. And if you're watching this, Mr. Pepper, or this is sent your way, I just want to say, before ending this video, to all of those that served in World War II, thank you for your service. Again, my name is Patrick Marlett, and thank you for the time.